Hello, welcome to Here Comes the Bride, the Church Begins. This is our 23rd devotional in the book of Acts. I am Jim Devore, the pastor of Cornerstone Church of Littlerock. So glad to have you with us during this study. We are from California, by the way, Southern California. And we are in Acts chapter 9, verse 32. Acts chapter 9, verse 32. Now, let me just remind you what we're doing as we go through the book of Acts. We're asking three questions. What do we learn of God and his eternal plan? What do we learn of God and his plan as he operates through the church, for the church, and because of the church? And finally, what do we learn of God as we see him working in the lives of individuals? And so we're in Acts chapter 9, and we are in verse 32. Now, we've just finished the conversion of Saul. And then Saul's ministry is going to be put on hold. It's going to come back here in a couple chapters. And now we're going to pick up again with Peter as Luke kind of walks us through a timeline of what took place in the first century as the church grew and spread. So let's pick up Acts chapter 9, verse 32. Now as Peter went here and there among them all, he came down also to the saints who lived at Lydda. So let's just pause there. That gives us an idea of what Peter's role is. Peter being the head of the church, probably one of the leaders of the apostles, okay? We see him now. What's his job? His job is he's going from town to town, village to village, church to church, and encouraging and teaching and helping all of them. He's a busy man, constantly on the go, okay? All righty? So he's in Lydda. There in Lydda, he found a man named Aeneas, bedridden for 8 years, who was paralyzed. Peter said to him, Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you. Rise and make your bed. And immediately he, Aeneas, rose. And all the residents of Lydda and Sharon saw him, and they turned to the Lord. Why would this cause him to turn to the Lord? Because if a man's been paralyzed and bedridden for 8 years, people are going to know that. The small towns around him are going to know this guy's been in his bed for 8 years paralyzed. Suddenly he's up and walking. Well, how'd that happen? Well, this guy named Peter proclaimed in the name of Jesus Christ that he should rise and be healed. And that's exactly what happened. What's your response to that? If he believes in a man who is that powerful, who can raise someone from the dead, who can heal him on his bed, then we're going to believe and follow him as well. And so they would have known of Jesus, because again, we're not that far removed from the actual living Jesus and his death and resurrection, his ascension to heaven, as the disciples began moving around from town to town and village to village. So they realized that Jesus, whom they may have known as just the prophet who died, and they may have heard rumors of him rising from the dead. They hadn't got a chance to really have a good encounter of his power. Now they have an encounter of his power through Peter, and they're willing and ready to follow. Verse 36. Now there was in Joppa a disciple named Tabitha, which translated means Dorcas. She was full of good works and acts of charity. In those days she became ill and died, and when they had washed her, they laid her in an upper room. Now, let's just pause. She's dead, okay? She's really dead, because they've actually washed her and cleaned her up. So everybody's assuming and knows that she's dead. She really is dead, okay? Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples, hearing that Peter was there, sent 2 men to him, urging him, please come to us without delay. Okay, this disciple named Tabitha, okay? She's a woman. She's a disciple. She's a follower of Jesus. Apparently has helped out the disciples as well, the apostles. Okay. She became ill and she died. She was beloved and loved by many. So when she died, they heard that Peter was nearby. They knew that Peter had been performing miracles in the name of Jesus. They're hoping that God will bring Tabitha back to life through Peter. So Peter rose and went with them. And when he arrived, they took him to the upper room. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other garments that Dorcas made while she was with them. Okay? Remember, her name's Tabitha, but also translated means Dorcas. We picked that up in verse 36. So she apparently sewed tunics and sold them or gave them to people. They were all blessed by this woman who had done so much in their lives, okay? All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other garments that Dorcas made while she was with them. But Peter put them all outside and knelt down and prayed, and turning to the body, he said, Tabitha, arise. I love that line, turning to the body. So everybody, again, acknowledgement after acknowledgement, this woman is dead. Okay? All right. He said, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. And he gave her his hand and raised her up. Then calling the saints and widows, he presented her alive. And it became known throughout all of Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. And he stayed in Joppa for many days with one Simon, a tanner. So what do we pick up here, okay? We pick up that Jesus has given Peter the same power that he had. And that by having faith in Jesus, Peter is able to rise this woman from the dead. Again, what's happening? The Lord is establishing his church. His eternal plan to use the church is being established through one individual, Peter, to demonstrate that this really is the work of God. You got all three of our questions answered there. The eternal purpose of God is being accomplished through the church, through one man, Peter, to demonstrate that God is working the miracles through Peter in order to establish his church to now continue the eternal purpose of God. Wow, that's exciting stuff. All right, let's go to chapter 10, verse 1. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion who of what was known as the Italian cohort, a devout man who feared God with all his household. You are not going to be happy with me on this one, folks. But this is a long story in itself. And I don't want to start it now because we won't have enough time to deal with it. So forgive me for rolling into it and rolling out of it. Okay? We'll pick it up next time so we can try to get this entire story into one devotion. Forgive me for not realizing that before I got started. Thanks again now for joining us for wrapping up Acts chapter 9. It's a short one today because we're going to have probably a long one tomorrow. Thanks for joining us for Here Comes the Bride, the Church Begins.